I'm Mila, 38, female, and my father publicly called me a disgrace after I spent 5 years paying for every single one of his bills. The weight of that word, disgrace, was heavier than all the financial burdens combined. It was the final straw on a camel's back that had been loaded with ingratitude and favoritism for decades. And in the silence that followed his outburst, I finally understood that my only value to my family was the money I provided, and I decided in that instant that they would have to learn to live without it. The arrangement wasn't something we ever signed a contract for. It was a slow, creeping responsibility that settled over me like a fog. It started 5 years ago, the day my father, Robert, collapsed in the garage. He'd spent his whole life as a mechanic, a man whose identity was forged in grease and steel. His hands were thick with calluses, a testament to a life of hard, physical labor. A massive heart attack at 67 didn't just weaken his body, it shattered his pride. The doctors told him his days of crawling under cars were over. Early retirement wasn't a choice, it was a medical sentence. My mother, Helen, had been a school secretary. Her pension was modest, and my father's savings were nowhere near enough to cover the new, terrifying reality of his medical needs. There were prescriptions with names I couldn't pronounce, regular visits to a cardiologist, and the constant, humming fear of another emergency. During a hushed family meeting in the hospital waiting room, my younger brother Ethan was the first to speak. He was 29 at the time, a newly licensed real estate agent with a dazzling smile and a fledgling career. "We'll all have to pitch in," he said, his voice full of performative gravity as he patted my mother's shoulder. "Whatever it takes." I, a software engineer with a stable, well-paying job, knew what pitching in really meant. It meant I nodded and said, "Don't worry about the money, I've got it covered." A wave of relief washed over my mother's face. My father, sitting weakly in a wheelchair, just grunted and looked away, his jaw tight. Ethan gave me a brief, thankful glance before his phone buzzed and he stepped away to take a very important call. That was the last time he ever mentioned contributing. From that day forward, I became the family's silent benefactor. I set up an automatic transfer for their mortgage. I gave my mother a credit card for groceries and gas with the bills sent directly to me. When the pharmacy called about a prescription refill, they called my number. At first, it felt like the right thing to do, the responsible thing. I was the eldest, the one with the means. It was my duty. But duty, I soon learned, is a cold and thankless companion when it is not met with even a sliver of gratitude. The favoritism had always been there, a constant, low-grade hum in the background of our family life. Ethan was the golden child, the charismatic son who could do no wrong. I was the quiet, serious daughter who was too smart for her own good. My father, a man of simple tastes and traditional values, never understood my career. "So you type on a computer all day?" he'd ask with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Your brother, now he's out there meeting people, selling homes, that's a real job." I remember one Christmas, about 2 years into my financial support, I had spent a small fortune on a top-of-the-line medical-grade recliner for my father. It was designed to help his circulation and ease the chronic pain in his back. It was practical, necessary, and expensive. I watched with a knot in my stomach as he unwrapped it. He looked at the chair, then at me, and said, "Where are we supposed to put this thing? Takes up half the living room." A few minutes later, Ethan presented his gift. It was a framed photo of himself, his wife, and their newborn son, my nephew. It was a lovely picture taken by a professional. My father's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. He held the frame as if it were a sacred artifact. "Now this," he announced to the room, his voice thick with emotion, "this is a real gift. This is legacy, a grandson to carry on the name." He spent the rest of the afternoon showing the photo to every relative, while the state-of-the-art recliner sat in the corner, a monument to my unappreciated efforts. My mother just gave me a small, apologetic smile and whispered, "He's just proud of being a grandfather, dear." Her excuses were as constant as his criticism. She was the family's designated peacekeeper, a role that required her to smooth over every rough edge my father created, usually at my expense. "Oh, you know how he is," she'd say after he made a particularly cutting remark about my single status. "He just worries." Or, "He doesn't mean it, Mila. His pride is just hurt because he can't provide anymore." Her justifications only made it worse. They implied that I should be the one to understand, to absorb the disrespect. To endlessly forgive because he was my father. They never seemed to consider what it felt like to be on the receiving end of his constant disappointment. The message was clear. My role was to provide, to be quiet, and to expect nothing in return. For 5 years, I played that role perfectly, burying my own hurt and frustration under a mountain of bills that I paid without complaint. I told myself I was doing it for my mother, for the family, for the sake of peace. But peace built on the foundation of one person's silent sacrifice is not peace at all. It's just a time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode. The week leading up to my father's 72nd birthday was a microcosm of the last 5 years. It began with a phone call from my mother on Monday. "Mila, honey," she started, her voice a little too bright. "I was just at the party store and you wouldn't believe the prices. Everything has gone up so much." I knew this conversational tactic. It was the gentle preamble to a request. I was driving home from work, navigating the dense evening traffic. "What do you need, Mom?" I asked, my voice flatter than I intended. "Well, your father wants a big to-do this year. He's feeling a bit better and he wants to see everyone. I was thinking of getting some of those nice helium balloons and a proper banner. And maybe one of those sheet cakes from the good bakery, not the grocery store one." "Okay," I said, signaling for a lane change. "Just use the card, that's what it's for." There was a slight pause. "I know, dear, it's just, I've already used it for the deposit on the community hall rental and the catering. I didn't want you to think I was going overboard." I closed my eyes for a second. A community hall, catering, for a man who would likely spend the entire party complaining. "Mom, it's fine, really. Get what you need to make him happy. Just text me the total later, okay?" "Oh, you're a saint, Mila. A true saint," she said, the relief palpable in her voice. The word felt like a tiny stone hitting a window that was already covered in cracks. A saint is someone who gives selflessly without expectation, but even saints, I imagined, would like to be acknowledged now and then. On Wednesday, Ethan called. He never called unless he wanted something or wanted to brag. This time it was the latter. "Mila, big sis, how's the world of ones and zeros?" He began, his voice oozing with the practiced charm he used on his real estate clients. "It's fine, Ethan, what's up?" "Just wanted to give you a heads up. I got Dad the most incredible gift for his birthday. He's going to lose his mind." "Oh yeah, what is it?" I asked, trying to sound interested. "A top-of-the-line brand-name tool chest. You know the big, red, shiny ones? Like the kind they have in professional garages. He's always wanted one ever since he had to sell his old equipment." I felt a familiar pang of irritation. "That's great, Ethan. He'll love that." What I didn't say was, "How are you paying for that?" I knew for a fact that Ethan was barely breaking even. His wife, Sarah, often posted on social media about their tight budget and saving for a down payment. A tool chest of that caliber cost thousands of dollars. The thought crossed my mind that he likely put it on a high-interest credit card, a grand gesture he couldn't afford, all for a moment of glory in our father's eyes. "Yeah, well, nothing's too good for Dad," he said, the implication hanging in the air. "I get him what he wants, you just pay the boring bills. Anyway, Sarah and I are bringing our famous 7-layer dip. Everyone loves it. See you Saturday." He hung up, leaving me with a sour taste in my mouth. I was paying for the hall, the food, the decorations, and the medication that kept our father alive, but Ethan would be the hero for bringing a dip and a shiny red box bought on credit. My own gift felt pathetic in comparison, though it was arguably the most important one. It was a new blood pressure monitor, one that synced with a mobile app and could send daily readings directly to his cardiologist. It was a piece of technology that could quite literally save his life. I had spent hours researching it. I had even preloaded the doctor's contact information and set up the entire system so all he had to do was put on the cuff and press a button. It was a gift of care, of vigilance. I knew, even as I wrapped it, that he would see it as just another cold, technical gadget, another reminder of his own frailty. The dread for the party began to build in my chest. These family gatherings had become minefields. I had to navigate my father's moods, my mother's anxious hovering, and my brother's casual superiority. I felt less like a daughter and more like a walking, talking ATM that was expected to feel honored to be in the room. I found myself justifying my own attendance. He's my father, he's 72, how many more birthdays will he have? The logic was sound, but it ignored the emotional cost. Each event chipped away at my self-worth, leaving me feeling hollowed out and resentful. On Friday night, the day before the party, I was paying some bills online. The alert for the credit card I gave my mother popped up. I clicked on it and saw the charges from the week. The party store, the bakery, the final payment for the caterer. Then I saw another charge, one that made me pause, a high-end men's clothing store. The total was over $400. I knew my mother wouldn't buy anything for herself there. It was a new suit for my father, or maybe an expensive outfit for Ethan to look the part of the successful son. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I was funding the very stage upon which I was about to be dismissed. I was buying the props and costumes for a play where I was, at best, a background character and at worst, the villain. It was in that moment, staring at the credit card statement, that a dangerous thought took root in my mind. What if I just stopped? I pushed it away, ashamed. It felt cruel, unthinkable. This was my family, but the thought didn't vanish. It lingered, a quiet question mark at the end of every justification, waiting. The community hall was buzzing with a forced cheerfulness. Helium balloons in silver and blue, my father's favorite colors, bobbed against the ceiling. A long banner that read "Happy 72nd Birthday, Robert," was stretched across the main wall. The air smelled of catered chicken, roasted potatoes, and my mother's anxiety. My father sat at the head of a long table, almost like a king holding court. He was wearing a new, sharply pressed blue suit that I knew, with a sinking certainty, was the $400 charge on the credit card. He looked healthier than he had in months, animated and laughing as he spoke with his old friends from the garage. My mother fluttered around him, refilling drinks, patting his shoulder, her face a mask of determined joy. She was working so hard to make this day perfect, to build a fortress of happiness around him that could withstand any intrusion of reality. Ethan and his family arrived an hour late, making a grand entrance. My nephew, now a boisterous toddler, ran into the room, and my father's face broke into that rare, genuine smile. Ethan, looking sleek and confident, clapped my father on the back. "Happy birthday, old man," he boomed. Sarah followed, carrying the famous 7-layer dip as if it were the crown jewels. They were the perfect family, a walking portrait of the life my father valued. I had tried to keep a low profile, finding a seat at the far end of the table with some distant cousins. I made small talk, nursed a glass of water, and counted the minutes until I could make a polite exit. I had already given my father his gift. I'd handed him the neatly wrapped box upon my arrival. He'd taken it without looking at me, placed it on a growing pile of presents, and said, "Ah, good, you're here. Go say hello to your mother. She's been running around like crazy." No, thank you. No acknowledgement, just a directive. The tipping point came, as it so often did, from an innocent place. An old family friend, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, sat down next to me. "Mila, it's so good to see you," she said warmly. "We hear so little from you. Your mother tells me you have a very important job in the city." I gave her a small smile. "I'm a software engineer, Mrs. Gable. I manage a team that develops financial security software." "Oh my," she said, impressed. "That sounds incredibly complicated. Your father must be so proud." Before I could respond, my father's voice cut across the table, sharp and loud. He had been listening. "Proud? I can't even explain what she does. Sits in front of a computer all day clicking buttons. It's all just numbers and nonsense." A ripple of uncomfortable silence spread through the nearby guests. Mrs. Gable looked flustered. "Oh, Robert, I'm sure it's very complex work." "Complex doesn't pay the bills," he scoffed, then seemed to remember that in fact it did. His face darkened. He hated that fact. He hated his dependence on my nonsense job. Ethan, ever the opportunist, jumped in. "It's a different world now, Dad. Not everyone can work with their hands like you did. Mila's smart. We've always known that." It sounded like a defense, but it was a backhanded compliment. He was positioning me as the weird, nerdy outlier and them as the normal, relatable ones. My father turned his glare on me. Smart doesn't mean you have any common sense. She's 38 years old. No husband, no kids, all she has is that job. What kind of a life is that? The room had gone quiet now. Everyone was watching. My cheeks burned with humiliation. This wasn't just a casual jab, it was a public indictment of my entire life, delivered in front of everyone I had known since childhood. I tried to stay calm to de-escalate. It was my programmed response. "My life is fine, Dad," I said. My voice tight. "We're here to celebrate you today. Let's not do this." "Don't you tell me what to do in my own home," he thundered, though we were in a rented hall that I was paying for. "You walk in here thinking you're better than everyone because you have some fancy degree. You think your money gives you the right to be disrespectful." Disrespectful? I was the most respectful person in the room. I had respected his pride by never mentioning the money. I had respected his wishes by funding this entire charade of a party. I had respected him, and in return, he was tearing me to shreds. My mother rushed to his side. "Robert, please," she whispered, her eyes pleading with me to just let it go. "Not today." But he shoved her hand away. He was on a roll, fueled by years of resentment and a misplaced sense of pride. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face contorted with a strange mix of anger and self-pity. He was building to his grand finale, and I could feel the entire room holding its breath. "You come in here with your quiet judgment," my father's voice boomed, filling the cavernous hall and silencing the last whispers of conversation. He was standing now, leaning on the table with both hands, his new suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. His eyes were locked on me, and they were filled with a vitriol that I had never seen before, not even in his worst moments. "You think we don't know what you're thinking?" he continued, his voice rising in volume and pitch. "That you're the one holding all the cards because you pay for everything? You think we owe you something?" I didn't move, I couldn't. I was pinned to my chair by the collective stare of 40 people. I looked to my mother for help, but she was staring down at her hands, twisting her napkin into a tight knot. Her face was pale, her expression one of complete surrender. She had checked out, leaving me alone on the battlefield. I glanced at Ethan. He was watching the scene with a calculated look of concern, the kind a person practices in the mirror. But I saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of satisfaction. My humiliation was his victory. It solidified his position as the good son, the one who brought joy, not conflict. "Well, let me tell you something," my father spat, his finger still aimed at my heart like a weapon. "I would rather have nothing than take another dollar from you. You and your long face, your fancy job. You walk around like you're better than us. You are a disgrace. You embarrass me." "A disgrace." The word landed in the dead center of the room and shattered the remaining fragments of my composure. It wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict. A final judgment on my worth as a daughter and as a person, and it was delivered by my own father in front of friends, neighbors, and family. In that single echoing moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't my heart, not exactly. It was the long, strained cord of obligation that had bound me to him for years. The cord didn't fray, it snapped. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. The burning in my cheeks vanished. The knot in my stomach dissolved. The desperate need for his approval, a need that had driven my actions for my entire adult life, evaporated as if it had never been there at all. I saw him not as my father, but as a bitter, ungrateful man. I saw my mother not as a peacemaker, but as a coward. I saw my brother not as a rival, but as a parasite. Slowly, deliberately, I bent down and picked up my purse from the floor. My movements felt calm, almost detached, as if I were watching someone else. I opened it and took out a thick white envelope. It was the reason I'd brought my purse to the table. Inside was a neatly organized stack of papers: the cardiology bill from his last follow-up, the invoice for the community hall, the receipt from the caterer, a printout of the pharmacy charges for the next 3 months, and the upcoming mortgage statement. I had brought them with the intention of having a quiet, private conversation with my mother later about the rising costs. I stood up, my chair made a soft scraping sound on the polished floor, a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the tomb-like silence. I walked the length of the table, my eyes fixed on my father. He watched me approach, his expression a mixture of defiance and confusion. He expected me to cry, to argue, to apologize. He didn't expect this. I reached his place at the head of the table. I didn't say a word. I simply placed the thick envelope on the tablecloth right next to his plate of half-eaten cake. I pushed it forward a few inches, a clear and unmistakable transfer of ownership. I looked at his face, seeing the flicker of understanding, the dawning horror in his eyes as he realized what was in the envelope. I then turned and met my mother's gaze. Her eyes were wide, filled with a desperate plea. "Don't do this, Mila," but I was already gone. I looked at Ethan. His mask of concern had slipped, replaced by a naked look of panic. He knew better than anyone what this meant. Without a backward glance at the other guests, I turned and walked toward the exit. The journey across the room felt 100 miles long. I could feel every eye on my back. I kept my head high, my shoulders straight. I didn't run, I walked. I reached the double doors, pushed one open, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The door swung shut behind me with a soft, final click, sealing off the first 38 years of my life. I was free. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the traffic or the route I took. My mind was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the storm that had just broken. It was the kind of profound silence that follows a massive explosion. When I finally pulled into my garage, I sat in the car for a long time, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. The silence was eventually broken by a single, ragged sob that escaped from my chest, but it wasn't a sob of sadness. It was a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. The weight was gone. The immense, crushing weight of their expectations, their criticism, and their bottomless need had been lifted. I walked into my empty apartment, and the quietness felt like a blessing, not a curse. For the first time, my solitude felt like peace, not loneliness. My first conscious act of freedom was to pick up my phone. I systematically went through my contacts. I blocked Robert, I blocked Helen, I blocked Ethan. It felt brutal, surgical, but necessary. I knew the onslaught was coming, and I needed to build a firewall to protect my newfound peace. I slept a deep, dreamless sleep for the first time in years. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through my window, and the world felt different, sharper. My phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, showed a string of notifications. Voicemails and text messages that had bypassed my blocks by coming from unknown numbers or through social media apps I hadn't thought to lock down. The first was a voicemail from my mother, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and indignation. "Mila, I cannot believe you. You ruined your father's birthday. He is beside himself with worry and anger. You need to call him right now and apologize for your behavior. You completely overreacted. This is not how a family behaves." Worry, I thought. He's not worried about me. He's worried about the contents of that envelope. Her message was clear. My feelings were irrelevant. My public humiliation was just behavior. The family's image and my father's comfort were all that mattered. Next was a string of texts from Ethan. "Amila, what was that last night? Seriously. Oh, you have no idea the mess you made. Dad is furious. Mom is crying. I hope you're happy. Just call Dad, be the bigger person, and apologize so we can move past this." His messages were textbook manipulation. He painted me as the sole source of the conflict, the one who needed to fix the mess. The idea that I should be the bigger person was laughable. I had been the bigger person for 5 years, and my reward was to be called a disgrace. His turn. There was nothing from my father. Of course not. His pride would never allow him to reach out. He would wait for me to come crawling back, full of apologies and ready to pick up the financial burden once more. He would wait forever. I deleted the messages without replying. Then I went about my day with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic mortgage transfer to my parents' account. It was scheduled to go out in 3 days. I then called the credit card company, reported the card I had given my mother as lost, and had it permanently canceled. The customer service representative was cheerful and efficient, unaware that she was helping me dismantle the framework of my old life. Each action felt like a click of a lock falling into place, securing my new reality. It wasn't about revenge. I felt no glee in what I was doing. It was about consequences. They had made their choice when they sat in silence and allowed him to crucify me. They chose him. Now they could have him and all the responsibilities that came with it. For the rest of the week, a strange sense of calm persisted. I went to work, I wrote code, I met with my team, I came home and cooked dinner for myself. It was all so wonderfully, beautifully normal. The constant low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years was gone. I hadn't realized how much space it had taken up in my head until it was no longer there. The silence from my family was unnerving at first, but I soon came to cherish it. It was the sound of my own life, uninterrupted. I knew it wouldn't last. It was the quiet before the real storm, the one that would hit when the first bill came due. Exactly 10 days after the birthday party, the storm broke. It arrived in the form of a frantic, almost hysterical phone. A call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me this was it. Hello, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Mila, thank goodness, it was Ethan. He sounded breathless, panicked. Why haven't you been answering your phone? I've been calling for 2 days. My phone's been working fine, I said calmly. What do you want, Ethan? What do I want? He shrieked, his voice cracking. The mortgage payment bounced, Mila. The bank called Mom this morning. They said the automatic payment was canceled, and Dad went to the pharmacy to get his heart medication, and they told him his prescription insurance, which is linked to your credit card, was declined. What did you do? I took a slow breath, grounding myself. This was the moment of confrontation I had been both dreading and preparing for. I had rehearsed this in my head a dozen times. I didn't do anything, Ethan, I said, my voice as cold and clear as glass. I stopped doing, there's a difference. What are you talking about? You can't just stop. Dad needs his medication. They have to have a place to live. Yes, he does, and they do, I agreed. And as I recall, Dad made it very clear that he would rather have nothing than take another dollar from his disgraceful daughter. I am simply respecting his wishes. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He clearly hadn't expected such a direct, logical response. He was prepared for tears and arguments, not for his own father's words to be used against him. He stammered. He didn't mean it like that. He was just angry, you know how he gets. I only know what he said, Ethan, in front of 40 people. Did you think his words had no meaning? Did you think I would just absorb that, forgive it, and keep writing checks? For 5 years, I have poured my time, my energy, and my money into keeping that family afloat. And in return, I was publicly humiliated while my mother and my brother sat by and watched. The arrangement is over. This isn't an arrangement, he yelled, his panic turning back to anger. This is family. You have a responsibility. You're right, I said. I do have a responsibility to myself, to my own well-being and my own self-respect, something none of you have ever considered. And as for family responsibility, Ethan, you are his son too, the son he is so incredibly proud of, the one with the real job and the legacy, so this is your chance to step up. The responsibility is now yours. He sputtered, a string of incoherent noises coming through the phone. Me, I can't. I have Sarah and my son. I have my own mortgage. I can't afford his bills. His medication alone costs a fortune. I know, I said softly. I've been paying it. Welcome to the real world, Ethan. You wanted the title of the good son. Now you get to earn it. You're unbelievable, he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. You're trying to ruin us. No, I corrected him. I'm just not saving you anymore. I ended the call before he could respond. My hand was trembling slightly, but my heart was steady. I had said what needed to be said. I had held my ground. A few days later, a long, rambling email from my mother appeared in my inbox. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It started with her health, detailing her sleepless nights and her newfound anxiety, all caused by my cruel actions. It moved on to my father's health, painting a grim picture of him rationing his medication because they couldn't afford a refill. It was filled with phrases like, after all we've done for you, and I don't know how you can be so heartless, and it ended with a final, desperate plea. Your father is a proud man, but he's your father. Please, Mila, don't do this to our family. I read the email twice. The old Mila would have been shattered by it. She would have been consumed by guilt, picturing her father getting sick, her mother crying. But the new Mila saw it for what it was, a last-ditch effort to pull me back into my designated role. There was not a single word of apology, not one acknowledgement of my pain. It was all about them. I moved the email to the trash folder and did not reply. The silence that followed was different. It was heavier, filled with the weight of their dawning reality. I knew this was just the beginning of their struggle, but it was the end of mine. 6 months passed, 6 months of the most profound peace I had ever known. The silence from my family became my new normal. The space in my mind that had been occupied by constant worry about them was now filled with me. I started hiking on the weekends, rediscovering a love for nature I'd forgotten. I reconnected with old friends who I had drifted away from, realizing I had pushed them aside to make more room for my family's endless needs. I took a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to do, and found a simple joy in the messy, imperfect process of creating something. With my own hands, my life was becoming my own again. My only window into their world came from a distant cousin, a kind woman named Claire who had always been neutral in our family's dynamics. She called me one afternoon, ostensibly to ask about work, but I knew she was really calling to give me an update. They sold the house, Mela, she said gently. I wasn't surprised. I had run the numbers 100 times. There was no way they could afford the mortgage and the property taxes without my income. Where did they go? I asked, my voice even. A small two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, Claire explained. It's been hard on them. Your father isn't taking it well. He feels like he's lost everything. He still has his family, I pointed out. He has Mom and Ethan. Claire sighed, a sound heavy with unspoken gossip. About that, things are very strained. Ethan is paying for their rent and some of the bills, but he's complaining about it constantly. Sarah isn't happy. Apparently, they had to pull their son out of a private preschool. Ethan and your father got into a huge fight last month. Your dad accused him of not managing his money well, and Ethan told him that if he had known what a financial black hole this would be, he'd have moved across the country years ago. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Ethan, the golden child, was finally buckling under the pressure of the role he had so coveted. The endless praise was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of financial responsibility. He was no longer the charming son with the perfect gift. He was just another bill collector in my father's eyes. A few weeks after that call, I was coming home from work when I saw I had a new voicemail from a number I didn't recognize but somehow knew. I hesitated, then pressed play. The voice was gravelly, hesitant. It was my father. Mila, he began, then cleared his throat. It's your dad, your mother, she wanted me to call. He was already deflecting, unable to even take responsibility for making a phone call. There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background of his small, new apartment. Things are difficult right now, he finally managed to say. This whole situation has been very hard on your mother. I waited for more, for an apology, for an admission of fault, for a single word of remorse for what he had said, for what he had done. It never came, that was it. That was his olive branch, a mumbled, self-pitying complaint disguised as a check-in. It wasn't an apology. It was an invitation for me to feel guilty and fix his problems. I deleted the voicemail. I felt a pang of sadness, not for the relationship we had, but for the one we could have had. The one where I was loved for who I was, not for what I could provide. But that relationship had never really existed. I had just been funding a fantasy. Today, my life is quiet, but it is not empty. It's full of my own choices, my own joys, my own future. I learned the hardest lesson of my life in that community hall, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who are incapable of loving you back. I did not ruin my family. They had been broken for a long time. I just stopped being the glue that held the pieces together in a shape that only benefited them. They have to build something new now on their own, and so do I. So I have to ask you, the listeners, after hearing my story, was I wrong to walk away? Was there another path I could have taken, or was severing the tie the only way to save myself? What would you have done if the person who was supposed to love you unconditionally declared you a disgrace in front of the world? I've made my peace with my choice, but I'm curious to know what others think.